Hello there and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the recent crime that I've committed against the PC community. That's right, I've done it. I've switched to a MacBook. This isn't a joke, and this isn't a I bought a MacBook and used it for 30 days just to see what I think video, and if you think I can afford to do that, you're sorely mistaken, because no, I've actually made the full switch from a Windows laptop to a MacBook for all of my laptop tasks. So today I'm going to be talking about what it's been like switching from my old Lenovo Legion 5 Windows gaming laptop with a Ryzen 5 4600H, 32GB of RAM, and a GTX 1650 Ti to my new M4 MacBook Pro. Before I go too deep though, I do want to touch on one thing, and that is that even though in this video there is a fair bit of comparison between this laptop and my old laptop, as it only felt right to cover the difference in the video, I do want to acknowledge that these two laptops are entirely different calibers of devices from different times as well. The Legion was an $800 laptop from 2020, and this MacBook is a $2,400 laptop from 2024. They're not comparable devices, but nevertheless, I still want to talk about the experience going from the Legion to the Mac in this video. But anyway, at the beginning of February, I bought this 14-inch M4 MacBook Pro with the 14-core Apple M4 Pro chip, 24GB of unified memory, and a 1TB SSD. I chose this laptop over the myriads of others on the market because I needed something that was well built, very powerful, had a good screen and speakers, and in particular, had amazing battery life. So let's start out by talking about the hardware on this laptop, as that was one of the major selling points for me. And I also don't think that I've seen many other laptops with this level of quality. I want to start out with the keyboard and trackpad, as they're the two main control surfaces of a laptop, and therefore, them being really good matters. The trackpad, even on the smaller 14-inch model like what I bought, is comfortably large and works well for navigating the screen. The haptic feedback on it is definitely interesting coming from a standard mechanical trackpad, but it makes the trackpad feel much sturdier, more accurate, and overall more premium than the ones I've used before. As for the keyboard, I do like the MacBook's keyboard a fair bit, and it feels really well built, but it's not a love at first sight affair, and I don't think that it'll ever be a keyboard that I will rave about or swear by any means. Initially, going to the MacBook's keyboard, the first thing that I felt was that it was super low travel, which with my very heavy typing style, I don't appreciate. I much preferred the higher travel keys on my old laptop's keyboard, and switching back to it for a typing test for the sake of capturing this B-roll made me feel like my fingers were back at home. One more thing about the MacBook's keyboard that I don't appreciate is the lack of a numpad. I can't blame them for it on the 14-inch model because there's not enough room to have a comfortable keyboard and a numpad in here, but it would be nice to see that on the 16-inch version. However, the keyboard isn't all meh. In fact, there's one thing that I really adore about it, the Touch ID sensor. Yes, fingerprint sensors are not a MacBook only feature, but this is my first laptop that has one, and oh my goodness, I love it. Not having to enter my password every time I open my laptop is great. Moving on from the laptop's control surfaces though, I want to cover the laptop's chassis and I/O offerings quickly, as these are two other very important aspects of it. The chassis on this laptop is pretty much perfect. It feels incredibly sturdy, is weighty enough to feel high quality, but also not annoyingly heavy, and overall, it just feels well built. It's certainly a nice change of pace from the all plastic body of my old Lenovo. Onto the I/O offerings on this laptop, this is where my biggest gripe with this new machine lies. It's not necessarily that the I/O on this laptop is bad, it's just that a lot of things require a dongle. On the left side of the laptop, there's the Apple MagSafe port, which I think is really awesome, because it means you don't have to use one of your USB-C ports up for charging, and if you yank on the charging cable, it won't risk breaking the port. Then there's also two USB-C ports that support Thunderbolt 5 connectivity, and a headphone jack. On the other side of the laptop, there's an SD card reader, which is awesome for me because it's super easy to pull footage off of my camera's SD cards with this, another Thunderbolt 5 supporting USB-C port, and finally, a full-size HDMI port, which is super handy. Overall, this laptop offers a ton of connectivity. The only thing that sucks about it is that I have to carry around these two dongles with me everywhere. I really do miss having a native Ethernet port on the laptop for networking stuff, and I wish there was at least 1 or 2 USB-A ports as well. The final comment that I have about the I/O on this laptop is actually about the headphone jack. It seems that Apple knows the market for these MacBook Pros, which isn't that surprising, but this means that they know that a lot of these will end up being used by video editors and music producers, who oftentimes use pretty high-end headphones for their work. Apple has put quite a powerful headphone amp behind this headphone jack, which is great because when editing on this laptop, there's more than enough volume available to drive professional grade headphones like these Sennheiser HD600s all the way up to ear-splitting levels. Okay, finally I'm going to move on to this laptop's screen and speakers, which are of course also super important. The screen on this laptop is absolutely gorgeous. Legitimately, it's so good looking, and notably as well, the notch doesn't bug me at all. Due to the way that macOS relies on the menu bar in applications, the interrupted screen space gets used by the menu bar, and the majority of the screen can be taken by the application, so the notch really isn't that much of a problem. Apart from that, the colors on the screen and its available maximum brightness are also so much better than that of my old laptop. Plus, it's 120Hz still, so I'm not losing out on refresh rate at all either. With the two laptops playing video side by side at full brightness, it's so easy to see that the MacBook screen is both brighter and looks better. Moving on to the Mac speakers, I've always heard good things about the speakers on MacBooks, but now I finally get it. These speakers truly are amazing for a laptop. The sound is surprisingly full while maintaining detail in the mids and top end as well. And I really enjoy using these speakers to consume content and even listen to music while I'm doing a task like script writing. It's not a perfect representation, but here's a recording of these speakers so you can listen for yourself. Now, all of this is great, but does physical hardware like this matter if the machine can't perform all that well? Well, no. So let's talk about the performance that this machine offers. I'm going to be talking about this system's performance only in the tasks that I usually use it for, with one exception: Cinebench. The only reason I tested this laptop in Cinebench is for the sake of providing some numbers that can be used for the sake of comparison. However, the rest of the time, I want to focus on what this laptop offers in the tasks that I actually hit it with. But for now, let's talk Cinebench R23 scores. This MacBook with the M4 Pro 14-core chip scored 21,000 points when I ran the multi-core test. However, I don't think that this number is a very accurate representation of this chip's performance. That's because online, everyone else seems to be able to get around 23,300 points, and I was also able to get that score when I first got the laptop before I installed all of my other apps that add a bunch of background tasks, so keep that in mind. As for single core, this laptop scored 2,178 points. These numbers are massively higher than my old laptop with a Ryzen 5 4600H that scored 8262 in multi-core and 1171 in single core. I should mention as well, all of these numbers have been with the laptops plugged in to wall power. How do they compare on battery? Well, one of the major advantages that the MacBook has over many other laptops is that its on-battery performance is practically identical to its performance when plugged in. With its on-battery multi-core score being 21,153 and with a single-core score of 21,084, this is really apparent. The old laptop, however, dropped its multi-core score from 8262 to 6879, and its single-core score down from 1171 to 1091. So yeah, this MacBook is fast. Even with my strangely low test result when I was running the final multi-core test for this video, this chip is still significantly faster than the overclocked Core i9 11900K that lives in my main desktop. Or really, that used to live in my main desktop. Stay tuned for that video. Moving on though, I want to make a few comments about the battery life here before I continue with the performance tests, because they actually tie into the Cinebench runs. I ran Cinebench R23 for 10 minutes on each of these laptops on battery, and I noted how much battery they used from 100% with their displays at full brightness as well. The Mac used 8% over these 10 minutes, and the Lenovo used 17%. a pretty massive difference in efficiency. I'll talk more about battery life during the video editing tests too, because it's particularly noticeable then, and the MacBook does extremely well. So I use this laptop for all of the basic stuff: word processing, spreadsheets, web browsing, etc. None of that really matters in regard to performance. I mean, it's almost a $2,500 machine, so it better be able to do that stuff well. So the tasks that I'll actually be focusing on in the rest of this section now are the heavier ones. In particular, 4K video editing in DaVinci Resolve, 3D CAD in Autodesk Fusion, EDA CAD in KiCad, and music production in Studio One. How about we start with that last one, music production. People use Macs for music production all of the time, so it should be no surprise that I wanted to test this. As someone who's into music production, but has only ever done it on Windows, I'm interested to see how much better it is here. I've never experienced the project ruining issues that many people talk about with this workload on Windows, but I can certainly say that with what little I have done on the Mac so far, its audio subsystem is definitely nicer than Windows. I can plug in an audio interface and it just works. I can switch audio devices in my DAW and it just works. Even though the DAW directly interfaces with the audio interface rather than going through the OS, I can still switch things around and it still works. I can't say the same about that for Windows, because Windows likes to throw a fit when I do that. Performance-wise in music production, the CPU in this MacBook had no issue running semi-sizable mixes with lots of plugins running, most of which are full analog emulations of real audio equipment, and they do require much more system resources. Moving on from music production, as there's not too much more to say other than, yeah, it absolutely crushes it, I'm going to start talking about CAD on this laptop. I mentioned two kinds of CAD in two different programs, KiCad and Fusion, but I'm going to cover them both together here. In Fusion, which I use for 3D modeling, the MacBook does great. Fusion is usually a pretty sluggish software on my Windows computers, and it's still kind of sluggish to load on this Mac, but once I get into the software, everything runs really smoothly, and even though the software puts more of a load on the CPU and GPU than web browsing, I don't notice it tanking my battery life much at all. I'd estimate I could easily get upwards of about 12 hours on a single charge of full-time work in Fusion, which is incredible. As for KiCad, which is a CAD software for electronics and PCB design, this laptop handles it amazingly. Arguably, this software is pretty lightweight, but the MacBook still handled it well. I haven't yet had any designs with hundreds of individual components and nets to design a PCB for yet, but even with a more complex design, I'd imagine that this laptop would handle it great. The Mac also handles 3D view for the PCB and KiCad very well, which isn't too much a surprise considering how well it handles Fusion. Plus, in my Fusion testing, I quite literally was using some exported 3D models from KiCad as references in my designs, and it didn't have any issues with that. So CAD and music production are awesome on this laptop, which is to be expected, I think. But how well does it handle 4K video editing? Several of my recent videos have been edited fully on the MacBook and exported on the MacBook. And to put it frankly, I can't tell the difference between editing performance on the MacBook and my dedicated video editing workstation with an overclocked i9-12900K Arc A750 graphics card and 32 gigs of DDR5 RAM. This laptop absolutely shreds this task, even with my decently high bitrate 4K 24 FPS footage. Plus, the screen on it is really nice if I ever need to do any kind of color correction on my footage because of how accurate it is. Even when running some more advanced animations in Fusion in DaVinci Resolve, the MacBook handles it great, though DaVinci does start to eat through the 24 gigabytes of memory pretty quick. Thankfully, I don't use Fusion animations very often in my video editing, and so I'm not too concerned about the memory usage. The only complaint that I have about this computer in video editing has to do with exporting. Apple still has not included AV1 encoding support on their M series chips, which really sucks because I like to export my videos in AV1 due to the incredibly compact file sizes. Thankfully, the export performance of its H.264 and H.265 encoders is still really solid. To exemplify the performance of these two encoders, I exported the timeline for my follow-up video on the gaming PC that constantly corrupted its Windows install in both H.264 and H.265 on both the MacBook and the video editing workstation. The H.264 export took 5 minutes 4 seconds on the MacBook and 4 minutes 15 seconds on the workstation. Then, using H.265, the export took 3 minutes 22 seconds on the MacBook and 3 minutes 48 seconds on the workstation, which is really impressive. I did test the workstation doing AV1 as well, and it took 3 minutes 24 seconds, and of course the MacBook couldn't finish this because it doesn't support AV1 exporting. In all, really solid exporting performance from this machine, even though it very disappointingly doesn't offer AV1 encoding. Overall, the experience with this laptop in regard to performance and hardware has been pretty darn amazing. But before I end this video, there is one more major topic to cover: the software experience. I've been a lifelong Windows user, and I haven't really had many experiences where I've had to use macOS on any computers. But I'm here to say that honestly, the switch to macOS hasn't been bad for me at all. I do see using Finder to be a bit of an adjustment from File Explorer, but I've gotten more and more used to it as time has gone on. The only thing that I don't really get is how I can customize this bar on the left to get quick access to some folders that I use pretty often, in particular the movies directory for my OBS recordings. I'm pretty sure there's a way to change this, I just need to get around to looking it up. I don't have that many gripes with macOS overall, but there certainly is one more that I want to mention, and that is that game support sucks. General software support is fine. My Microsoft apps like Word, Excel, and Outlook are available and work flawlessly on Mac, but game support is trash. I know that Apple is trying to get gaming on Mac to be more of a thing, but scrolling through my Steam library, pretty much none of the games in here that I actually play are available on macOS, and that's a shame. Plus, it's also the reason that there are no gaming benchmarks in this video. I do really wish that game support was better, especially because the 14-core M4 Pro seems to have a pretty powerful GPU in it. But in any case, that's really the biggest gripe I have, so how about I move on to some of the things that I actually prefer macOS for over Windows. First off, the Apple ecosystem is really nice. I use an iPhone, and being able to message people from my laptop, have my photos and notes automatically sync between the two, and also being able to copy and paste between the phone and laptop is really awesome. Then, I've also been quite enjoying getting used to the virtual desktop system on macOS. Even though I know it exists, I never really use this on Windows, but now that I've started using it in macOS, I've found myself really enjoying it for switching between different sets of windows that are related to different tasks. The last major comment that I want to make about macOS is that it's incredibly snappy feeling. I don't really know how to put it, but it feels way more responsive and just snappier than any Windows system that I've ever used, which is pretty incredible. Plus, it stayed this way even as I've installed all of my applications on it, and even when I have a lot of things open. However, at this point, a whole 9 pages into this script, I think that I've said everything I really wanted to say about my switch to Mac for my laptop. I don't think I'll ever become a Mac user in the desktop space, and I still very much like my Windows desktops, but honestly, I don't think I'll be leaving the Mac world in relation to laptops for a long time. Well, that's all that I have for you in this video. I hope you were able to at least enjoy it and maybe even learn a thing or two. In any case, I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.